The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
WikiLeaks has now pledged to reveal the name of a second country that is allegedly having virtually all of its mobile phone calls recorded by the US NSA, in spite of a warning from Glenn Greenwald that leaking the information could, quote, lead to deaths. This is very interesting what's going on. The pledge came after The Intercept revealed that the Bahamas, as well as one other country, were having most of their mobile phone calls recorded and stored by an NSA program called Sommelget. While the Bahamas was named, the identity of this second country was not named, and Glenn Greenwald, who first broke the news about the Edward Snowden revelations to the world, said on Twitter that the decision was made not to reveal the name of that second country because they were convinced that it would lead to deaths. This morning, WikiLeaks posted a tweet saying, "We will reveal the name of the censored country whose population is being mass recorded in the next 72 hours, so presumably by Friday at the very latest." Whether WikiLeaks is actually capable of releasing that or not, we don't have proof of. Presumably, Lewis, they wouldn't say they can release that information unless they know that they can.
Right. And the fact that this could result in deaths, well, is it a fact? We don't really know that.
Well, let's explore that, though, because there's one more piece, Lewis, which may be relevant to your comment, which is Glenn Greenwald was in a back and forth on Twitter, and when he was asked, well, in what way would it lead to deaths, he said, it's based on particular physical vulnerabilities of the small company involved. Apparently, this is specifically because the surveillance is somehow linked to a specific small company, that individuals involved with that company could be at risk of death. So it's not this vague and general way, if you believe Glenn Greenwald, that deaths could result, but specifically because of this one company.
It also sounds like even the NSA is outsourcing, which is great. But I don't think that's a good reason not to leak this information.
Well, that's the argument that's being made by some, right? Which is we have an entire country being victimized, at least allegedly being victimized, a small abusive company, and the possibility of harm coming to a small group of people does not supersede the harm coming to the entire nation. Now, some would argue, well, hold on a second. The surveillance, while you may be against it, is not leading to people's deaths, although we don't know exactly whether there are ways that it is or is not. Ultimately, Lewis, what do you think your prediction is here? Do you think we will hear from WikiLeaks what this other country, what country it is?
I think we will. This is what WikiLeaks does. It's their sole purpose. And I don't think they're leading us on here. I'm sure we'll hear about it.
We have one more anecdote related to this, which is that some experts say we have no reason to believe that WikiLeaks even has access to all of the documents Edward Snowden took, released, provided to Glenn Greenwald. That at this point is becoming more of a logistical thing. I don't know that WikiLeaks would say they are going to release this if they are unable to do so. Yesterday, I told you about Gary Keene, who said at a Republican primary debate on Saturday in Florence, Arizona, that 99% of mass shooters are Democrats. Of course, yesterday we laughed about it and we said, of course, this is ridiculous and it's not true. And now he has issued a public apology and said that his comments were inaccurate. His apology was, this past weekend, I made a comment about the political affiliation of perpetrators of gun violence in the heat of a debate. I've since learned that the information that I based the comment off of was inaccurate and incorrect. I like that, Lewis, how the heat of a debate might make you say something completely ridiculous but highly specific, like 99% of mass shooters are Democrats. I love it. What kind of a person are you that the heat of a debate makes you make such a specific, unfounded claim?
And he makes it sound like he read this in a study somewhere. Can you please show us the study? Like, where did you get this information? I'd really like to know. Something tells me that we won't be getting that from him.
Maybe it is what I mentioned yesterday. He heard Roger Hedgecock mention it on his radio show. He also went on to say, I've always believed that when you make a mistake, you should own up to it. Too many politicians today offer nothing but spin and excuses when they say something they shouldn't have. I'm not going to do that. Simply put, I shouldn't have made the comment. I want to offer my apology for making it without any reservations. Okay, I'm going to praise his apology in one way. As absurd as it is, Lewis, that he's saying it was based on the false information that he had been provided, he at least isn't saying, I'm apologizing if people were offended, and implicit in that is, if you weren't offended, I still mean what I said. At least he's not doing that, and that is a certain level of progress.
I don't know. He's still clearly making up the fact that this was based on some type of information he received. And if that's true, I just, even the most ridiculous things we've ever heard about mass shootings and Democrats and conspiracy theories, no one has gone as far to say that 99% of mass shootings come from Democrats. Nobody, Dave.
It is ridiculous. Here's the real question I would have for him. Did you honestly believe that 99% of mass shooters were Democrats? Or did you say it knowing that it wasn't true because you thought it would score political points? What do you think, Lewis? Do you believe that he honestly, it was a sincerely held political belief of his that 99% of mass shooters were Democrats, or that he said it for political gain?
I would guess that it was for political gain, but you never really know how stupid some of these people are.
On Friday night, rapper Macklemore and Ryan Lewis performed a secret show in their hometown of Seattle to honor a new exhibit at the city's EMP Museum. This would have been completely unremarkable, completely not newsworthy in any way, except for the fact that Macklemore did the concert dressed up as the stereotype of a greedy, hook-nosed Jewish man. If you're watching the show, you can see the costume that he was wearing. And this is particularly interesting and offensive because Macklemore has been a strong advocate of equality. His song Same Love, advocating same-sex marriage and equal treatment of LGBT individuals, has become almost like a calling card right now, or a theme song of LGBT equality. And then he comes out there and wears this insane anti-Semitic costume. If you want to see some examples of this caricature of Jews, go to Google Images, images.google.com, and just make the search Jewish caricature, and you will see identical images to Macklemore's costume. Now, Macklemore tweeted out that this was just a fake witch's nose, a wig and a beard, a random costume, not his idea of a stereotype of anybody. Later, he posted an apology on his website where he said he didn't mean to mock Jewish people by wearing this costume that some say was anti-Semitic. He tweeted out a link to the Anti-Defamation League, so on and so forth. And he said, listen, I respect all cultures and people. I would never intentionally put anyone down for the fabric that makes them who they are. I love human beings. I love originality. I happen to love a weird outfit from time to time. Here's the deal with this, Lewis. If it is true that Macklemore had absolutely no idea that this was representing this horrible caricature of that hook-nosed, greedy Jew, and this is the same drawing that was all over Nazi propaganda. This is a common drawing that Macklemore goes out on the stage wearing. If it's true, I guess we are supposed to believe that Macklemore and his entire team that allowed him to wear this are completely ignorant. I guess they would rather be thought of as ignorant rather than bigoted.
I guess if it was just him who made these decisions, although it looks like someone applied some makeup to attach that nose, so on and so forth, then he's probably the least anti-Semitic person on the planet, because it wouldn't have even connected in his brain that he looked like a stereotypical greedy hook-nosed Jew.
The issue I have with this, though, is that if we are to take Macklemore seriously on his advocacy of same-sex marriage, that means that Macklemore is okay being considered more than just a guy who sings songs. And if that's the case, I don't know that we can take him completely seriously on same-sex marriage and LGBT rights, but just allow him to so casually plead ignorance on the anti-Semitic costume.
I don't know, David. I mean, I think considering his progressive background, maybe we should just take his word and see what happens down the road. But I'm not going to. I don't know. I'm not going to swear him off just yet.
No, I honestly am very curious. I mean, is the real explanation that he and everyone who saw the costume were that ignorant? And what does that say about Macklemore? I don't know. Very, very strange stuff, and we'll see if there's any more follow-up to it. I imagine this will come up again at some point. Hey, could Bernie Sanders be a viable progressive candidate for the Democratic Party? We have spoken about whether we could have a true progressive as the president of the United States. We've talked about how President Obama and even to an even greater extent, Hillary Clinton are not particularly progressive Democrats. And I told you last week or the week before about the passing of activist and friend Tim Carpenter. I was at his memorial service in Northampton, Massachusetts over the weekend. And one of the topics that kept coming up at Tim's memorial and at the PDA conference was how Tim was instrumental in collecting these 11,000 signatures urging Bernie Sanders, the independent, pseudo-socialist, progressive senator from Vermont, to run for president. And Tom Hayden wrote an article in The Nation magazine talking about Tim Carpenter and talking about Bernie Sanders, saying that pressures from the Democratic establishment are building quickly against the independent Vermont senator. Few, if any, Democratic elected officials are likely to endorse Sanders for fear of retribution from the formidable Hillary Clinton forces. Women's groups, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Hollywood liberals, organized labor are coalescing into a huge front for Hillary Clinton as well, and are sharply opposed to a potentially divisive primary fight with Sanders. This is interesting because there's a couple of ways to look at this. If Bernie Sanders, who is an independent but caucuses with Democrats, were to run as an independent, he is very aware that he may pull a Ralph Nader effect, which will splinter off Democratic votes and maybe lead to a Republican victory. And Bernie Sanders is pretty pragmatic and he wouldn't want to do that. At the same time, if he runs as a Democrat, it becomes increasingly unlikely that he will ever make it to the final ballot, thus reducing the visibility of alternative and more progressive views. At the same time, if he does run as a Democrat, if he shows up at debates, Lewis, and this is what I have in mind, if Bernie Sanders runs as a Democrat, shows up in debates, and really advocates for progressive policy, progressive economic and social policy, the more mainstream, middle-of-the-road Democrats, for calling them something, will have to move to the left to not appear to be really conservative within the Democratic primary, and that could be a really good thing.
It could be. I don't really know. I mean, overall, I think that Hillary is just too much of a powerhouse for him to be able to beat. I don't think it's enough to have, even if he does really well in these debates, to have the endorsement of the Democratic Party. You need the corporate backing too, unfortunately, and that's what Hillary's going to have.
Any scenario that would lead to Ted Cruz being president if Bernie Sanders runs is a bad scenario. However, any scenario that will inject real progressivism into the Democratic Party without jeopardizing or without putting an extreme right-wing Republican at an advantage is a positive thing in my mind.
So better he run as a Democrat or not run at all?
I'm leaning right now to Bernie Sanders running as a Democrat, and I know that some people won't like this, but I'm trying to be as pragmatic as possible. What's the best next step to make the Democratic Party more liberal? And I think that might be it.
That could be it, but I like where you're going with it, David, but we have to be realistic. I don't think it's going to change much of anything in the long run.
Next, pedophile anti-gay smears backfire on the right wing. Also, did you know Common Core educational standards will make your children gay? And would you vote for a candidate whose claim to fame, whose primary credential is castrating pigs? I don't know if I would. We'll talk about that next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. If you're worried about liberal bias in statistics, facts, other reality-based things, liberalbias.com will show you how to unskew your reality, making it easier to fit it into the conservative worldview. Today's new member of the day is Matthew Chesser. Matthew Chesser, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Also, special message for Valerie Hill. We received your check signing up for membership, but nowhere in your check or letter did you tell us your email address. So we have no way of sending you your access credentials. So please email us and make your email address known so we can get you all set up. Common Core. Common Core may not be a perfect system of educational standards. However, Common Core standards are not going to turn people gay. Unfortunately, that is what Florida State Republican Representative Charles Van Zant thinks will happen. He was speaking at the Operation Education Conference in Orlando, and he warned that the implementation of Common Core in Florida may turn your children gay. Here's what he had to say.
The Bible says a lot about being double-minded. These people that will now receive $220 million from the state of Florida unless this is stopped will promote double-mindedness in state education and attract every one of your children to become as homosexual as they possibly can. I'm sorry to report that to you.
Even if some of the methods for teaching math in Common Core are not the best methods, they're not going to turn anybody gay, Lewis.
Yeah, I'm not sure where he's going with this. Does he mean that things that are confusing or don't work right might inadvertently turn you gay? I don't understand.
Even in the context of Republican hysteria over any kind of new policy that people like George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan didn't personally sign off on, Common Core is disproportionately sending conservatives into a complete tailspin. And Right Wing Watch put together a list of some of the most outrageous reactions, and they include an Alabama Tea Party leader saying that a vote for Common Core will damn all lawmakers to hell. The American Family Association warned that children won't survive Common Core. The Eagle Forum, which is Phyllis Schlafly's group, said that it will promote homosexuality. And Republican from Oklahoma, Jim Bridenstine, said that it is socialism. Oh, and of course, to top it off, WorldNet Daily saying that Common Core will turn America into Nazi Germany. Glenn Beck is certainly at the forefront of this. He believes that these educational standards are evil and are designed to turn the United States into a serf state under the rule of China and Islam. Developing educational standards, without question, is an iterative process, but when you say that the standards will turn kids gay, you're basically saying my constituency, me as thinking of me as a voice at the table, I shouldn't even have a voice at all, is essentially what you're saying. You're making yourself completely irrelevant in the discussion.
Yeah, I don't understand what the Republicans really plan to do about education in this country. It seems that they're trying to make things go in reverse. Of course, we know what education is like in a lot of these red states. And they often, there's a lot of criticism comparing us to China, comparing us to India, saying education is better in these places. And then when we try to improve education, people are worried about turning into India and China. I don't understand it.
No, I don't understand it either. But honestly, right-wingers, if you really want to have a seat at the table to talk about how to change educational standards, don't say the current standards will turn kids gay. That's not a good start to a conversation. We know that the anti-gay right likes to link homosexuality to pedophilia, even though, as we've talked about many times, there is no factual empirical link. Well, that link backfired the other day. The right-wing publication Barb Wire made a huge mistake. They put an article together about the anti-gay, the gay link to pedophilia, rather. And the article itself was pretty trashy, but they put this picture up where it looks like somebody is holding up a sign that says NAMBLA for Obama. And NAMBLA is the North American Man-Boy Love Association, a group which, while it claims not to be a pedophile group, they're just advocates of love between men and boys. Sickening. Anyway, they're widely considered to be a pedophile group. And the picture would imply that, hey, look, here are pedophiles, so-called pedophiles, who support President Obama. As it turns out, the picture was not a real picture. And when Jeff Allen was asked where they got this picture, did they edit it themselves? Did they check the veracity of it? Jeff Allen tweeted out that they, quote, got it on Google. They got it on Google. Now, if you actually go to Google Images and search for Obama NAMBLA, there are no pictures that I'm finding. That NAMBLA for Obama picture, I can't find any instances of it on the internet that are older than the story, than this story itself. So I don't know, Lewis, whether they created the picture or whether they, quote, got it off of Google. But in either case, backfiring embarrassingly on the anti-gay right.
Yeah, there's been a lot of these internet pictures that have backfired recently with people holding signs. Ann Coulter, for example, was one of them. But I'm sure we can expect that picture to go viral nevertheless and have all sorts of conspiracy theorists pointing out that Obama is part of NAMBLA. Who knows?
But you know what this is about, right, Lewis? The increased hysteria on the right that they're losing on state after state after state on the issue of marriage equality.
Yeah, and we're going to, I mean, we can expect to see more extreme responses to that as there are fewer and fewer states that are keeping that tradition alive.
Joni Ernst is a Republican member of the Iowa Senate, a lieutenant colonel in the Iowa Army National Guard. She's also running for U.S. Senate from Iowa in the 2014 election. This is her first ad where she talks about this is her claim to being a good candidate is that she castrated hogs growing up. Check this out.
I'm Joni Ernst. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm. So when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork.
Joni Ernst, mother, soldier, conservative.
Yeah. Okay. And then this is the latest ad where she is, quote, setting her sights on Obamacare as she's firing a gun. Check it out.
She's not your typical candidate. Conservative Joni Ernst, mom, farm girl, and a lieutenant colonel who carries more than just lipstick in her purse. Joni Ernst will take aim at wasteful spending, and once she sets her sights on Obamacare, Joni's gonna unload. Oh, and one more thing. Joni doesn't miss much.
Give me a shot. I'm Joni Ernst, and I approve this message.
This should make us cry. Our country is really in trouble. Her self-professed credentials, the things she thinks make her most attractive and most qualified to be a senator, are that growing up, she held pig testicles in her hands and chopped them off. That's number one. And number two, that she's going to set her sights on Obamacare, something which has provided millions of people with health insurance that they didn't previously have. The first line of an ad, I grew up castrating hogs. I don't know what's scarier, Lewis, that she thinks this is the way to appeal to voters, or that this has the potential to actually appeal to some Iowa voters.
In a way, I can see how that would appeal to voters. She's saying she grew up with humble beginnings, David, perhaps not with a silver spoon in her mouth, but
instead with a testicle knife in her hand rather than a silver spoon in her mouth.
Right. But I'm pretty sure we can agree that all you really need to be a viable Republican candidate is to have your sights set on dismantling Obamacare. That's pretty much all it takes.
In spite of 40 failed attempts to repeal it in the House, one of her actual positions on something political, we don't know that there were weapons on the ground when we went into Iraq. However, I do have reason to believe there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was the intelligence that was operated on. So there, Lewis, is something specific that she has, that she holds as a view. Joni Ernst, hog castrator at large, campaigning hard for those Iowa votes. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Next, we will talk to Bill Scher. How bad is it for the Democrats in the upcoming midterm election? And New York enacts age 21 for buying cigarettes. We will talk about that.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Bill Scher is joining us. He's senior writer at Campaign for America's Future. Bill, we've been sifting through what seem like conflicting reports about whether things are bad or really bad for Democrats in the 2014 election. We see headlines like Democrats are facing their worst midterms in 20 years, but at the same time, if you look at some of the individual races, particularly in some red states, it's not really looking all that bad for Democrats. So let's take like the broadest view possible to start with, House and Senate. How are things looking right now?
Well, I think the two comments, worst landscape for Dems in 20 years and not as bad as it looks, they're both true. I mean, this is not a great year for Democrats. The map is tilted against them in the Senate. The types of seats that are up and competitive are Democrat incumbents in red-leaning, right-leaning states. And we haven't had a picture like that in some time. So you could take the fact that it's not a great year for Democrats and not get hysterical and presume it means it's going to be a 1994 style Republican wave. Because once you get down to the race by race level, you don't see Democrats behind by double digits in all the competitive Senate states, or even in some of the competitive House districts. You see lots of close races. Democrats are on the defense. There's a lot of turf that they have won that they have to defend, and it's a close call whether they'll be able to defend all of them. But you can't point out a lot of races where it's just lost and Democrats have no chance.
There's this background where over the years we always hear about congressional approval lower than ever, right? 15, 14, 13, 9% in some cases, depending on what polls you look at. I've always contended that general voter dissatisfaction, if it leads to decreased voter turnout, is generally bad for the more progressive candidate, right? When we look at voter suppression, there is one of the two parties prefers a lower turnout, and that's Republicans, because it tends to lead to the more conservative candidate winning. Is that a factor, do you think, in the 2014 elections, a general dissatisfaction which may turn out to hurt Democrats or the more progressive of the two candidates, whatever their party affiliation may be?
Well, it's possible because the Democratic coalition that propelled Barack Obama has as part of it a lot of voters who are not regular midterm voters.
Right.
They don't have the same level of enthusiasm for the off-year elections. Single women, for example, young single women, just to give you one example, as a constituency that doesn't always turn out for these things. There's an adage that if you vote for in 3 of a certain type of elections in a row, you're almost sure to vote for the next one. It's habitual for you. And younger voters, that type of voting behavior is not habitual yet. So it's one thing where we don't know if some of the technological advances that Democrats have made can counteract some of those historical patterns. Democratic turnout in some of these constituencies was a lot better in 2012 than people were expecting. They thought, enthusiasm's poor, it's a re-election, the economy's not as perfect as they want it to be, these folks are going to drop out. And a lot of them didn't drop out because Democrats had figured out how to identify these voters, reach out to them, use the right kind of persuasive appeals to get them to show up. Can they replicate that in 2014? You don't know that. You don't know yet, and a poll's not going to tell you. So we shouldn't assume that there's an enthusiasm gap that's going to be fatal. And one thing I'd add to that is we shouldn't presume that a level of enthusiasm that's declining automatically signals an ideological shift. There's nothing in the data that tells us that the country is growing more conservative, regardless of what happens on election day, because Republican numbers are worse than Democratic numbers as far as overall favorability is concerned. There may be
and in fact, I would even say that that's actually a good point, which is if we look at the polls, it seems that the country continues moving to the left, and it seems that there may be a disconnect from the way people are actually voting. I mean, if you look at the Affordable Care Act, I think is the perfect example, where poll after poll confirms that an overwhelming majority of Americans think the government has a duty to provide a basic level of health care to everybody, agree in general with what the Affordable Care Act seeks to do, but don't seem to make the connection sometimes, for example, that if they don't have care accessible in their state, it may be not because of Democratic President Obama, but because, for example, of their Republican governor choosing not to expand Medicaid. So I think that there's this complete disconnect that's taking place right now.
Well, I think there's a long-standing tension in the broader electorate between wanting government to solve certain problems and cynicism that they will do it well. And the two parties fight over these two forces forever. So you have a certain frustration with the healthcare.gov rollout, and you have frustration with Republican governors when they don't expand Medicaid when they have free money to do it. You can't, and it'd be one thing if the data showed that people are mad at Democrats and they love Republicans. So that shows that the anti-government side of the argument is winning. We don't see that. We see lots of frustration with Republicans that they obstruct, that they don't problem solve, that they have unserious solutions. That remains from 2008 and 2012. So that's why I would be surprised to see a wave election this time around, because the underlying data doesn't show that ideological shift.
I've been talking quite a bit over the last few years about the fracturing of the Republican Party, which I see as three groups that have, of course, some overlap. If you think of a Venn diagram, you have the low-tax, pro-business conservatives, which I think Mitt Romney is closest to that group. You have the limited government, pseudo-libertarian, anarchist, Tea Party types. And then you have the evangelical right-wingers, who are mostly voting based on religion and how religion connects to social issues. The question I have, assuming you agree that the Republican Party is fractured in that way, is whether the fracturing helps progressives in any way at all, because once it comes to the final elections, once we get beyond the primaries, you're not really going to see members of any of those three groups of the Republican Party vote for a real progressive, are you?
Well, probably not vote for a progressive. They might stay home. A faction might stay home if they're disenchanted with what the Republican leadership is doing. So far, we haven't seen those rifts in the party totally explode. I give Boehner a certain degree of credit, professional level of respect, if you will, that he navigated all the shutdown nonsense in a way that did not lead to a total collapse of the government or an economic death spiral with the debt ceiling, without having a full-on bloody revolt and civil war in the party. He navigated just carefully enough that didn't happen. Now, the true test of things might be this summer, when after the bulk of the Republican primaries ends in mid-June, and there's a legislative session that goes from June to July. This is seen as a sweet spot where maybe immigration reform might actually happen. And if Boehner does stick his neck out to get that done, does that Tea Party faction revolt and stay home on Election Day? Or do they suck it up and say, look, Republicans are still better than Democrats. I'm not going to let this one issue change my entire perception. I'll still show up in November. And there's a lot of polling data to show that there are a number of conservative Republicans that are actually okay with immigration reform, and the anti-immigration voices aren't that big of a faction. So those are the calculations I think Boehner and the other Republicans will be weighing. We won't know how deep a rift it might cause until, one, they actually do it, and two, how you see the results on Election Day in November.
Yeah, I think the immigration issue is going to be a fascinating one going into 2016. I mean, we saw Jeb Bush talk about how illegal immigration is an act of love, and then going on to say that he actually would be okay with something resembling a path to amnesty. It's not practical to think we're just going to kick everybody out who's here illegally, but the base reacted in a way that was very negative. So I don't really know whether that position, Jeb Bush's position on immigration, would get a Republican to the general election in 2016?
Well, we have a couple test cases now just from this past month in North Carolina. Renee Elmers, who was the incumbent Republican in a district that went for Romney in double digits. She took a very aggressive pro-reform stance. She had a public argument on Laura Ingram's radio show with the host, accusing her of being ignorant for her anti-immigration position. And her Republican challenger tried to make hay of that and whip up the Tea Party to say that here's our chance to oust a rhino pro-immigrant Republican. And he lost by a lot. In Nebraska just last week, one of the Republicans for the Senate primary was on the ropes, tried to accuse the frontrunner of being pro-amnesty. So he took a very hard-line immigration. He lost by, I think, 20 points. So there isn't evidence yet, even in Republican areas, that taking that dire anti-immigration position represents more than a sliver of the party, which is why the noise that came out of Jeb Bush's remarks might not be indicative of what the entire base feels.
Very, very interesting stuff. Bill Scher, senior writer at Campaign for America's Future. Bill, a pleasure as always.
Thank you very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
New York has raised the minimum age to buy cigarettes to 21 years old on Sunday. The law was signed into law. This was signed into law back in November of 2013, and this was shortly before Michael Bloomberg left office. And there was a 6-month waiting period before it came into effect. And this is pretty much unprecedented among big cities, raising the legal age to buy cigarettes from 18 to 21. It also applies to other forms of tobacco and e-cigarettes. Now, when we covered the passing of the law 6 months ago, reaction was split 50-50. A lot of people thought this was an absolute disgrace. Here's a couple comments from back then. I think this would be fine if they raise the age of the military to age 21. If you can die in war, then you can do everything the rest of us can. If you can't, then obviously you aren't mature enough to serve in the military. Another comment, they should just raise the age of majority to 21 for everything: military, sex, smoking, drugs, voting, marriage, contracts, etc. Or legalize smoking and drinking for 18-year-olds. When did the legal age ever stop anyone from smoking anyway, etc., etc.? I tend to agree on the one hand, Lewis, that there is no amount of cigarette smoke that is beneficial or not harmful to one's health, while there are amounts of alcohol that are not harmful or, according to some, beneficial to one's health. At the same time, there is not really a precedent of people smoking cigarettes and then getting into a car and killing themselves or others, while the drunk driving crisis that we have in this country is widely documented. So I do agree that the age for drinking and smoking should probably be the same, but what should the standard be? How much risk there is from the activity harming just the person engaging in it and harming those around them? How do you determine that?
Well, I guess you could put cigarettes in that category if you're talking about just how much it harms you or harms the people around you. If you're smoking cigarettes yourself, it's basically suicidal, if you ask me. I don't understand how you can do that and not have it just and somehow make it seem like there's any positive effect. And the same with secondhand smoke. It's just disgusting, filthy, nasty, and harmful in every way, shape, and form. And just because it doesn't impair you doesn't mean it's not harmful.
Well, that's the question. What should be most important in determining the age at which someone can legally decide for themselves to partake or not? And it is a good point that banning, in other words, if 14-year-olds want to smoke, they can figure out a way to smoke anyway. But the idea that having the age limit at all does nothing also isn't true, right? If you push it from 18 to 21, maybe you at least delay new smokers to some extent or for some period of time. I don't really know the answer, but for some reason, I know that this really has fired up both liberal and conservative elements of our audience. And I look forward to hearing people's stories about if they are in New York here. What have you seen? Any interesting anecdotes related to needing to be 21 to buy cigarettes? Please send them in and we'll follow up on this. A Republican wants to bring back firing squad executions. This is in the wake of the botched legal injection in Oklahoma last month. A Utah lawmaker says he believes firing squads are more humane in terms of executions by the state. He wants to bring them back as an option for criminals sentenced to death in Utah. This is Representative Paul Ray, a Republican, like I mentioned, and he wants to introduce this proposal during the upcoming legislative session in Utah. Lawmakers in Wyoming as well as Missouri floated similar ideas in their states. Both efforts did not succeed. Ray may have more success. Utah already had a tradition of execution by firing squad. Ray says that it's controversial and that it might seem more palatable now because states are struggling to get the drugs they need for the lethal injection, and that there was the botched execution, so this might seem more humane. The thing is, though, Lewis, death by firing squad is not guaranteed to go off without a hitch either.
Certainly not. I could imagine a situation in which, for some reason, the majority of the bullets evade vital organs, and the person, I don't know, could suffer for some time. I mean, I can probably come up with 50 better ways to execute someone.
50 might sound a little dark, though, Lewis.
Excluding lethal injection, because there seems to be issues with that, David. But I don't know. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't be talking about this at all.
No,
right?
no. And that's what I was thinking of. When someone suggests bringing back firing squads, you're going to have a hard time convincing them that we should abolish the death penalty altogether.
Yeah, I think so. You know, if we go back to firing squads, people are going to want to get more creative and more medieval. And I don't think we need that.
State-sanctioned murder is not justice. It is really about vengeance. And we need to somehow take back the setting of the agenda in this country from the most extreme elements among us. Instead of figuring out whether to bring back the firing squad or not, let's get rid of the death penalty once and for all. I mean, it's amazing that we have to go in this direction of arguing whether or not it's a good idea to bring back firing squads. And remember that study from 2 weeks ago, 1 in 25 on death row, presumably not guilty, according to a study. It's unbelievable. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call it any time. Here's a voicemail we got.
Hey, David. This is Brandon out of Dallas. I saw your story about Ken Ham and Pat Robertson having their little feud about the age of the Earth and the universe. And I thought it was funny that two people who sell an invisible product might just have disagreements on how it works or even where it came from.
Right.
You know, I think of two people trying to sell you gasoline for your car, but neither one's gas actually gets your car anywhere.
Yeah.
So to distract from their inability to make a good product, they will blame each other and try to point out inadequacies in each other.
Yeah, it is hilarious. I guess we shouldn't be surprised that their imaginary theories, their false ideas, or at least unfalsifiable and unprovable ideas, might conflict with each other. Here's one more voicemail.
Hi, David. This is John. And I wanted to respond to one of your YouTube videos where you ask the question, will a real progressive ever be president? I think what progressives need to do, instead of focusing on trying to get a progressive president, they need to work more on building up a progressive caucus in local elections like city council people. Or
no question about it. And that's absolutely something that needs to happen. But it can happen concurrently with making attempts at progressivizing the presidential election, like we talked about earlier with the addition maybe of Bernie Sanders in Democratic primary debates. Want to make one correction or clarification. Yesterday we were talking about the blogger Clayton Thomas Kelly, who took a picture, an illegal picture, of Senator Tad Cochran's wife, who is bedridden with dementia. When I was talking about that story, near the end of the story, I referred to the blogger's worldview as a demented worldview. It was completely not a pun, not a joke. And even though I only got one email about this saying, you may want to just clarify that wasn't some kind of attempt at humor, I want to make that absolutely clear, that it was simply a word that came to mind. There was no joke, pun, or humor intended there. It's absolutely disgusting what happened. On today's bonus show, pirated movies are being shown to prisoners in county prison. A woman is ordered to not write about her family on Facebook. And in Japan, Power Japan Plus announces a game changer in the battery world. DavidPakman.com/membership. Sign up, get the archive of shows, get the commercial-free feeds, and Lewis's bonus show. Talk to you then.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.